What's the project you're currently working on?
Hi Heather, thanks for inviting me. Well, at the moment, I'm editing a dystopian fiction novel by a Brazilian author named Bárbara Bie. The book is called Aeon and the Prophecy of the Sun, and tells the story of a young woman who receives the promise of the sun, which is Jesus, a symbol for Jesus, in the midst of dark and endless winter. Christian fiction is a genre that has been growing a lot in Brazil in recent years, as we will see later in our webinar.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for that, Daniel. Sounds like a great book. I wish I could read Portuguese. I could check it out. Um, and Daniel, it's you can go ahead and share your screen now, and then we'll get to our questions and answers at the end.
Okay, just a second. That's it. Well, hi everyone. It's now 10 o'clock in the morning here in São Paulo, so I must say bom dia a todos. That's how we say in Portuguese, good morning, everyone. And I'm really glad to contribute in some way again for MAI. This time through this webinar, I was in Puebla, Mexico last year for Let's Words. That was my first time at Let's Word, and it was a very professionally and spiritually enriching experience. I feel extremely fortunate to have been there, learning from such talented people from so many different parts of the world. So God be praised for MAI and God be praised for His beautiful church worldwide. Well, first of all, I must say I feel challenged and I feel a little nervous having to speak in a language I'm not totally comfortable with. So I must apologize in advance for the many grammatical and pronunciation mistakes I will certainly make while speaking in English. But for someone who makes a living correcting other people's texts, maybe I should take all this curious experience as a lesson in humility, after all. So, having expressed my apologies, I'd like to introduce myself properly. My name is Daniel Faria. I'm 38 years old, and I live in this chaotic, crowded, and in its own strange way, charming city of São Paulo, Brazil. I was raised as a Baptist. Now I am a member of a Lutheran church. I've been married to Tabatha for 14 years, and we have a son called Liev, 7 years old. Since 2010, I have been working at Mundo Cristão. Mundo Cristão is the most traditional Brazilian evangelical publishing house, and we will celebrate 60 years in this 2025. Mundo Cristão was founded in 1965 by an American missionary called Peter Cunliffe and has been led for 4 decades by the brilliant Mark Carpenter, who, was some of you may know, was president of the MAI board for a while. And having Mark as our leader, we at Mundo Cristão have dedicated our efforts to publishing popular works aimed at the spiritual edification of our readers in various areas of life. Our catalog, in this sense, is a very broad and eclectic one. Includes Bibles, study Bibles, devotionals, Bibles, yearly devotionals, books for couples, books for parents, books for church leaders, for children, teenagers, young adults, and etc. And our efforts as editors is to ensure that each book carries an inherent promise of growth, understanding, inspiration, and transformation for the reader who absorbs and applies the texts. And as you may know, there are so many ways to fulfill that mission. One of those ways is translating books from other languages, especially as you may know by your own experience from English. So, among our main titles are the Portuguese editions of books written by authors known throughout the world, such as Gary Chapman, the author of The Five Love Languages series, Stormy Martin, Eugene Peterson, Philip Yancey, Beth Moore, Tony Evans, Russell Moore, Miroslav Volf, among many others. And however, I have to say that, especially in the last 10 years, our focus has been on Brazilian authors. This is due, among other things, to the significant growth of the evangelical population in our country, which over these 60 years has grown from 5 or 6% to 30% of the Brazilian population. It's a it's a dynamic, it's a vibrant church, yeah, which it certainly brings with it several problems inherent in such rapid growth, but which is today, and I do believe it, is capable of exporting Christian literature to every part of the world without having to rely too much on books originally written in other language and of course in other contexts. This means then that today around 70% of our books are written by Brazilian authors. And this naturally implies for me as an editor, much deeper level of relationship with the authors than it happened, I don't know, a decade ago when most of our catalog came from translated books. And in this case, those cases, the editor's role was very often simply to supervise the quality of the translation because after all, another editor had already performed all this arduous editing process with the author. That not being the case, now more than ever, I have to look for ways to get the best out of the authors I work with, and well, that's precisely the subject of our webinar this morning. I must say that there's probably not so much I would say today that will sound new to you. I'm not saying this as a way of flattering you, but I am aware that you already know how to get the most of your relationships with your authors. MAI itself already offers excellent resources on the relationship between authors and editors, and I especially recommend a webinar led some months ago, if I'm not wrong, led by Stephanie Richard, senior editor at Tadeo House Publishers, a longtime partner of Mundo Cristão. And that webinar, led by Stephanie, contains excellent insights on this topic. But in any case, I think that at the very last, that in this morning, we can laugh with each other and perhaps whine with each other of this very fun and unique task of editing other people's texts. So, as a quick introduction in a manner of an epigraph, let's see what some famous authors have to say about the sometimes maddening and frightening relationship between author and editor. This first quote is from Ariel Liev, an American journalist and writer, and she says, "A real editor isn't just someone you work with. He is your guide. He sees your brain doing its thing and learns its weaknesses and abilities. And if he's really good, he figures out what you need to hear to compensate it for the former and accentuate it later. He's the person you trust with the most intimate thing you have, your own voice. Well, hey, it sounds great, isn't it? The editor as a guide, it's just like I don't know, Moses leading the people of Israel through the desert. The person you trust with the most intimate thing you have. Can you also see the responsibility? Well, that's a great thing. But the next one says authors who move on with praise for the editors always seem to reek slightly of the Stockholm syndrome. Well, it doesn't sound so great this time, but you know, that man, Christopher Richards, the infamous British journalist and author, is one of the most vocal opponents of Christianity in the last decades, a detector of God himself. So, what does he know about editor? Let's just ignore him, okay? But the next one is my favorite by the great poet T.S. Eliot. Some editors are failed writers, but so are most writers, which is brilliant. Okay, let's move forward. Being our subject this morning, the relationship between editor and author, and how to bring out the best in this partnership. Let me now very briefly introduce some of the other parts of our equation, some of the authors we've been working with at Mundo Cristão over the last years. I want to ask you to pay special attention uh, to the diversity of these authors in terms of profile, because our intention this morning is precisely to try to find general principles on, on how to get the best out of each author, regardless of who they are or where they came from. So let's begin with one of our most classic authors at Mundo Cristão, the Presbyterian Reverend Augustus Nicodemus. Augustus is one of the leading names of the Reformed movement in Brazil. He is famous for his clear and objective expositions of the biblical texts with over 40 years of pastoral ministry. His training in seminaries in South Africa, Holland, and the United States. In short, he's a first-class theologian, widely read by other pastors, other theologians, and other seminary teachers. And but I have to say that despite his impressive resume, Augustus is one of the easiest authors to deal with, generally accepting all the editor's observations and the editor's suggestions. And this is due to a history of stability and mutual trust from decades of partnership with us at Mundo Cristão. And here we have the four authors of the Corajosas series. Corajosas is a modern and Christian reading of classic fairy tales. Corajosas means something like brave girls in English. Arlene Diniz, Keren Anne, Maria Araújo, e Thais Oliveira are four young Brazilian evangelicals who write Christian fiction for children, teenagers, and even young adults, and those in whose books have sold more than 200,000 copies to this day. Most of them sold in non-Christian bookstores. It's a marvelous thing. And they are especially active on social media, using it with creativity, with elegance. They are especially concerned with the aesthetics of their books. Uh, and it's incredible because they attract crowds of young girls at book fairs and events like that. And each of them has also written their own solo books with great success as well. And being so young and so talented, they bring a freshness to Mundo Cristão that is something very precious. Working with them in this sense is extraordinary because it requires not only intense attention to the text itself, but also to the design, the layouts, the covers, and even to the promotional pieces and everything else. I have learned a lot from them and from several other authors of Christian fiction. A genre that I was just saying has been growing so much in Brazil that it has attracted the eyes of the non-evangelical press as being one of the main trends in the Brazilian publishing market for the coming years. Okay, the next one is Davi Lago, 39 years old, just a year older than me, and he's a Baptist pastor who also holds a doctorate in philosophy and theory of law. He's a World Vision ambassador and a research coordinator at the Politics, Behavior, and Media Laboratory of one of Brazil's leading universities. Yeah, Davi is an impressive force. He's capable of dialoguing with the Brazilian biggest institutions and personalities, including ex-presidents and influential politicians. And and he does that without diluting or attenuating his evangelical identity and his evangelical convictions. Um, in the sense, he's one of our main examples of Christians who are qualified to act in the public sphere with competence and intelligence. And as the editor of his books, my main challenge is trying to be at the same level as so much talent and to help ensure that in some way that these skills are translated into accessible and transformative books for a wider audience. And this we have achieved because David is also a successful author in Brazil. Finally, Tiago and Ana Ruth Cavaco, Tiago and Ana Ruth Cavaco, from Lisbon, Portugal, whose books have been published by Mundo Cristão, both in Brazil and in Portugal. Maybe some of you may know the number of evangelicals in Portugal has been raising a lot in recent years, largely due to the influx of Brazilian immigrants and yet it's a number very small, something around to 5 or 6% of the total population. It's small, especially when we compare it to the number of Catholics and non-Christians in that country. Anyway, Thiago and Ana Rucci are two of the most talented and discerning and perspicacious authors in our catalog, showing us Brazilians how to really hold on to a countercultural faith in such an adverse scenario. Thiago is capable of weaving paradoxical and intricate sentences in the style of J.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis, and I do believe he deserves to be read and heard not only in Portugal and in Brazil, but also throughout the world. He's the author with he's the author whom every editor dreams of. Working in his books basically consists of getting out of the way and interfering in as little as possible. Faced with such a diverse panorama of authors who led so different ministries, authors who came from so different backgrounds, even different countries, is it possible to say that there are general principles that can be applied in this relationship between author and editor? Well, my initial response would be an emphatic no. I do believe that each case is a different case, as we used to say in Brazil. Um, each situation is a different situation, and you have to work in a unique and special way with each one of them. But when I was invited by Little Word last year to address this very issue, I began to think about it, and I came to some interesting insights that have been useful to me, and I hope they will be useful for you as well. I would dare to say that there are at least three ways to help a Christian editor get the best out of their Christian authors, and let's see which they are. First of all, humble service. Well, this is much more than an editorial principle for us Christians. It's an attitude for life, an attitude for each of our relationships. Let's remember what the Apostle Paul says in Philippians 2, chapter 2 and verse 3. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Let's also remember Ephesians 4 2. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Oh, well, being humble is, in my view, the Christian virtue per excellence, the one that must distinguishes us from other worldviews. And this to the scandal of thinkers and philosophers like Nietzsche and so many others who see it as a sign of weakness. But could it be that we ourselves are somehow contaminated by this view? The fact is, we editors often get into a kind of cold war with our authors. Since we certainly have more experience in the publishing world than they do, we often think we have nothing to learn from them. In fact, we think we are the ones who teach them and guide them through the best ways. Frankly, I think that this kind of presumptuous attitude make us incapable of exercising a role such as that of an editor. Because an editor, in my opinion, should be extremely curious, willing to learn from others, and open to new and different perspectives, including perspectives on the act of editing itself. I honestly don't believe in the larger than life editor figure with his grandiose and mesmerizing ideas. I should say that um, the editor is just an editor. He's not the author. He's not the protagonist. He's a servant and a humble one. So here I would like to quote a passage from a book that has been very useful for me in terms of understanding the dynamics between author and editor. The book is called O Primeiro Leitor. O Primeiro Leitor, the first reader, and was written by Luis Schwartz. Luis Schwartz is the founder and CEO of Brazil's largest publishing house, Companhia das Letras. And in this book, Schwartz recounts his relationship as an editor with some of the greatest names in contemporary literature, both in Portuguese and in other language. Names such as José Saramago, Chico Buarque, Amos Oz, Susan Sontag, John Updike, among many others. And throughout the book, Schwartz emphasizes that in this relationship, it's the author, not the editor, who deserves the spotlight. And he say that in the world of books, there's only room for the ego of writers, those who expose themselves through literature and bear the risks of this act. As the Austrian thinker Karl Kraus once said, artists have the right to be modest and the obligation to be vain. Um, and now another quote. This one is from The Subversive Cop Editor by Carol Fisher Salas. Salas was a contributing editor of the renowned and feared by some Chicago Manual of Style, widely used by professionals in the English language publishing market. And I recommend that you read it, this book, The Subversive Cop Editor, especially if you're a young editor who works directly on the text itself, side by side with the author. That book contains many technical recommendations that I would even like to address here, but that may not be the focus of our presentation this morning. Says to see the author-editor relationship as inherently adversarial is to doom yourself to a career of angst and stress. The writer's job is far more difficult than the cop editor's. She has to actually write the thing. It's your privilege to polish a manuscript without the tedium and agony of producing it in the first place. Your first goal isn't to slash and burn your way through an effort to make it conform to a list of style rules. Your first goal is merely to do no harm. Um, well, I have to say, I saw a lot of the adversarial relationship happening in my experience as an editor. As they used to say, been there, done that. But if you see the author as an enemy, you have a big problem because it doesn't even make sense to be engaged in a war with someone who will necessarily be on your side along the way. Um, and yet, as we also say in Brazil, being servants doesn't mean being subservient. Let's remember the quote by T.S. Eliot. Some editors are failed writers, and also are most writers. And if there's anything that each of us knows, is that authors do have their faults, do have their eccentricities. They have their own strong personalities, and yes, they often need to be guided by hands in order to improve themselves and improve their texts and their books. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. However, how can this be done? We then came to the second principle, the iron sharpening collaboration. In Proverbs 27, verse 17, we read, as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. Also in Proverbs 27, 5, verses 6 and 5 and 6, we read, an open rebuke is better than hiding love. Wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. Uh, in other words, in this author-editor relationship, certainly there is also room for exhortation, for correction, and even for reprehension. Um, if all this it is done in a spirit of humility, of service, as we just saw, the result will be positive for both sides. But yes, I know, easier said than done. How can this be done in real daily editorial practice? Well, there's a lot of examples I could tell you, but I would like to highlight just one or two of them. For example, it may seem a small thing, but gentleness, kindness in the comments that you left on a text in the file or in the doc of the word processor you use, assuming, of course, that you even bother to explain your decisions to the author, and I sincerely hope you do so whenever possible. Um, but it's very different to say, hey, this is wrong or correct this than to say, hey, is this the best choice here? Would we have some alternative for that word in order to avoid ambiguity? Maybe this one, maybe that one, because the editor needs to be diplomatic. Diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy should be a mandatory item in every job's editor's job description. Um, in my experience, what I've been trying to do is combine praise with exhortation in that order. First, compliment, uh, then correction. First, you highlight the qualities of the author's text, and then you point out possible corrections, always as a suggestion, not as an imposition. Considering, of course, that these eventual problems are not elements that would harm the book in some way or would even go against the publisher's editorial policy. Yes, in many cases, the author will be simply be completely wrong. Um, so if this happens very often, it's a serious problem, but we will talk about that later. In addition to this healthy combination of compliance and criticism, another point that helps sharpen your partnership with your author is recommendations. I I have an habit of gifting authors with books written by great writers, not necessarily Christian writers, but authors in books whose style is in some way, or style or the themes are in some way similar to that of the author. Do you remember? Do you remember I mentioned it, some Christian fiction authors at the beginning of this presentation? They are young authors who essentially are reading other Christian fiction authors, uh, mm, amateur Christian fiction authors, and the fact is that many of these books of this culture fall short editorially. They fall short of the works produced by the big non-Christian publishers. And some of these books, of these Christian fiction books that are gaining fame in Brazil right now, are books that were born in a fan fiction culture, an indie, independent culture. A culture that's sometimes rich and vibrant and inspiring for sure, but which doesn't always follow the so-called best editorial practices. Since the books written by these young authors deal with themes such as friendship between women and between and mother-daughter relationships and things like that. I usually recommend then some titles for example, I don't know if you know this book, but there's a book called My Brilliant Friend by the Italian writer Elena Ferrante. And it's a book voted recently, I don't know, maybe some months ago, as the greatest novel of the century by the New York Times. And if you already read it, it's certainly not a book that necessarily or ostensibly express Christian values, but it's a so beautifully written book with its short and well-timed chapters. And the same applies to authors such as Kazuo Ishiguro, David Mitchell, Marilyn Robson, she's a Christian writer, when a young author has access to material of this quality, of such a quality, and when this recommendation is made by the editor with due care, I think that something magical can happen because these authors will get to know other writing techniques, and as a result, this will certainly improve their own work, and everybody gets happy in the end: the editor, the author, and especially the reader. And it's wonderful that we editors cooperated in such a way in someone else's development. Um, I really like this quote by the brilliant writer, American writer Toni Morrison. I deem it was taken out of its original context, but I really appreciate these words. She says in the book Beloved, this award-winning book. Um, she says she's a friend of my mind. She gathered me, man. The pieces I am, she gathered them and given them back to me in all the right order. And we can make a adaptation of this of these words. The editor is a friend of my mind. She or he gathered my texts, and the pieces I write, he gathered them and give them back to me in all the right order, which is incredible thing. And finally, sorry, an iron sharpening collaboration also requires reliability and credibility. Just as a football coach, and as a Brazilian, I have to use football as an illustration. Just as a football coach gains the trust of his players when his team wins a match after each one of them played successfully in the coach assignment to them. So an author, when he follows an editor's advice and succeeds, he will not only trust the next advice, the next suggestion, but he will also naturally incorporate it into his own writing process. I remember when I told something to a friend of mine, an author called Iago Martins. Iago is a Baptist pastor who has a channel on YouTube with almost 1 million subscribers. In other words, a truly popular author who could easily give up the advice of an editor and still achieve success on his own. And Iago is an author who fills his books with quotes from scholars and other authors as a way of giving credibility to his arguments. And this is an important concern because without a doubt, we need to give credit to the sources that influence what we write. However, often in a book aimed at a wider audience, this could result in a boring and a difficult reading. The opposite affects what was intended. And in Iago's case, a style that didn't even match the dynamic and captivating language that made him famous on YouTube. So I argued that his readers, when they buy a book written by Iago Martins, they want to know his opinion on that given subject, not the opinion of dozens and dozens of other authors, no matter how skilled or and renowned they are. And he agreed with me, and together we significantly reduced the number of quotes in that book, which ended being a bestseller, especially among young adults, um, which is his main audience by far. And then in his next book, he delivered it to the editor a text with fewer quotes, which not only made my work so much easier, but also resulted in a better book. And most importantly, he now knows that. So this brings us to the third and final principle, effortless action. This principle, I have to confess to you, I didn't take from the Bible, and I hope you won't get scandalized by this because it's a principle I've taken from Chinese Taoism, referring to Wu Wei, a Chinese term that could be translated as inaction or effortless action. In fact, it's the idea of flowing with the moment, of making each stage of a process happen naturally, rather than trying to master, to control each movement with our own strength. Um, the Bible repeatedly talks about surrendering our ways to God. In Proverbs chapter 3 and verses 5 and 6, we read, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In, our, in all your ways, submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. And in Proverbs 16:9, we read, it's human nature to make plans, but it's the Lord who directs our steps. The theme of God's sovereignty and the human's lack of control is quite obvious in Scripture. And I guess it would be unnecessary to include Bible verses that address this issue. But here I want to make shameless use of this Taoism concept because I think it can help us to see maybe in a new angle our inability to exercise control. So of course, I'm running the risk of oversimplifying rich, profound, and intricate concepts. And the proof that I'm running this risk is that the following quote is taken from the School of Life, that website famous for simplifying complex things. Although I actually think they do it in a very competent way. But there we go. Yue, sorry, oh, sorry. Yue means in Chinese non-doing or doing nothing. It sounds like a pleasant invitation to relax or worse, fall into laziness or apathy. Yet this concept is key to the noblest kind of action according to the philosophy of Taoism. According to the central text of Taoism, the Tao Te Ching, the way never acts, yet nothing is left undone. This is the paradox of Yu Wei. It doesn't mean not acting, it means effortless action or actionless action. It means being at peace while engaged in the most frenetic tasks so that one can carry this out with maximum skill and efficiency. As I said, there are more legitimated ways to summarize this concept, and I really suggest that those of you who are interested in it seek to learn more about Wu Wei. It has been very useful for me and it's much more a principle of conduct of attitude than a religious concept. So it does not hurt, in my view, any Christian conviction. Obviously, each person may see it differently. But the question is, what does that mean in terms of the editor and author relationship? Well, it means the editor needs to cooperate it so the process of producing a book takes place naturally, effortlessly, so to speak. How does this happen in practice? Well, in a sense, it happens when an author writes and an editor edits. It's perhaps the most obvious thing to say here, but it's something I think we forgot very often. When we don't have an humble attitude of service. And when we don't have an iron sharpening partnership, what happens is that we try too hard to make things happen. We start acting like authors, which we are not. We are editors. That's why, before anything else, we must know who our authors are, both on a personal level and in terms of qualification for the role of author. We should not look for people who aren't authors to write books. That's not natural. That will cause unnatural efforts that will disrupt the natural flow. It's not part of the natural flow of the book production process. Let's bring it to our minds. Some people were born for other ministries, not for the ministry of an author of Christian books. They may be gifted communicators. They may be excellent pastors. Uh, um, they may be charismatic leaders who make things happen, but they are not authors. They have no text skills. They may not even have familiarity with text and words. They don't get excited about books. They don't live in this world of the text as we editors do. So we must advise these people to exercise their gifts elsewhere, where they will certainly bless lives, but they will not do it as authors. This is especially significant because we Christians, especially we Protestant Christians, heirs of the Reformation, we value the written word and we value literature and books as instruments for transforming lives. We cannot take this lightly. Um, and for the topic, I'd like to quote Caitlin Beatty. She's author of a book called Celebrities for Jesus, an exceptional book published by Brazos Press that we translated into Portuguese last year. I urge each one of you to read it if you haven't done yet, because this book explores the ways the fame has reshaped the modern church and why celebrity is so woven into the fabric of the evangelical movement, including of the Christian editorial world with sad results. And Beatty reading on how Christian publishers often serve as platforms for non-authors to express at best poor views of what Christianity is. She says, books can change lives like few media can. That's why I wanted to be an editor in the first place. And that's why I mourn what much of Christian book publishing has become a place where celebrity platform has taken over the conversation. It didn't have to be this way. Yet, even discerning, spiritually sensitive editors are no match for the broader industry's push for bigger profits, shinier personal brands, and the all-consuming logic of late modern capitalism. To be sure, plenty of individual leaders and authors in Christian book publishing stay in the industry to serve the church and amplify important messages, regardless of celebrity appeal. They have the right motives, but the pressure, and I come back here, but the pressure to create larger profits year after year often requires trading good motives for pragmatic market considerations. In our celebrity-obsessed age, celebrity sells. At the least, Christian book buyers should be aware of why certain authors get the privilege of publishing a book. It's not always because they are called. Sometimes it's simply that they have cultivated the impressive appearance of calling. Uh, well, maybe you're not in a position to say no to an author for any reason. I understand that. I live in Brazil, a country that's often peaceful and calm oriented. But in the metaphorical jungle that is our Christian editorial market, there are some wild animals too. So I imagine that, like me, many of you find yourself agonizing over bad texts by people who are not actually authors. And but the editor, for his part, the editor edits texts. He doesn't work miracles. He's not the Holy Spirit to endow someone with talents. And it's not natural for the editor to write books instead of the author. I truly believe this, and I have chosen to spend more energy on prior evaluation, in prior judgments, in order to save energy on the editing process itself. So, my friends, let's learn ways to say no. Let's learn to work less. Let's learn to work with intelligence. And let's encourage our authors to work less too. Let's encourage our authors to work within their limits. Some authors are good at writing fictions, others are good at writing devotionals, others are good at writing theology. And that's the way it should be. No one can do everything. Sometimes the best way to get the best out of your author is to point out their limitations. So, in short, let the principle of effortless action guide each of your decisions. Um, and you know, God has blessed our efforts in Mundo Cristão in this direction. But when we start prioritizing good and talented people over shallow celebrities, we start selling more, not less books. These are the points, the key points I would like to make this morning. Maybe I should have focused more on professional aspects of even practical examples of editing. But it's difficult to tell what works and what doesn't work in each context and in each language, in each country. I don't know the day-to-day reality of my fellow editors, but I sincerely believe that those three principles that we explored today can be of great help to any editor who wants to have a fruitful and productive partnership with their authors. So, with the humility exemplified by our Lord Jesus Christ, who gave up his divine prerogatives to serve us, with the keen partnership of brothers and sisters in Christ who seek each other's growth, and with trust in God's ways so that we don't waste undue energy, I believe we will grow in this fundamental and valuable task of spreading the message of the Christian faith through literature. So may God give us the talent and the energy that each one of us needs. Thank you, and em português, obrigado.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Your email address is up on the screen for those of you that are
Sorry.
interested in that. Yep. Uh, we'll take any questions anyone has. You can post them in the chat box. There's a few things that have come in already. Just a comment here. We had a lot of good engagement. People were really interested in what you had to share today. One comment here. Thanks for taking us with you into your job in editing and bringing out good books written by amateur writers. Thank you for the picture of Coach, the friend, the person whose mind I am sharing. That's one comment we got here. We have another question that came in from Jacob. He's asking, how do I go about becoming an editor?
Well, that's a good question. I never intended to be an editor myself, so it happened in a very strange way. I remember I was in the university. I was in a time when I was distant from God, from church, and from faith itself. And I started reading some books in the library of the university and books written, especially books of literature written by the greatest Russian writer, Lev Tolstoy. That's the reason why my son called Liev. And I remember being so transformed by the power of those books, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, that I started reading in a blog, a personal blog. I started reading about spiritually things. and then an editor of Mundo Cristão. This blog attracted the attention of this editor, and he called me to an interview, and then I was hired by this editor to form the editorial team of Mundo Cristão, where I am to this day. So I would say that you have to write and you have to read a lot and you have to edit. Basically, these are the three steps. And when you started doing this in public, I think that someone will notice you and you can show your work to some editors, to some publishing houses, and that's how it happened to me in any case.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. We have a couple who are asking, can you share the books you mentioned earlier in your presentation? What were the titles of those books?
Uh, the book reading those fiction Christian books.
I think so. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I have them here with me because that's not my room I'm using for this webinar, but I can show you some of them here. These are the Christian, some of the Christian fiction books we are publishing for young girls. This is a romance story, especially for 12 and 13 years old girls. This is a Christian horror fiction, and there's a lot of books that I could show to you, but I will have to make some organization here.
Is there a place online where people can see Mundo Cristal's titles?
Okay. You can visit our website mundocristão.com.br, and I can show you if you are interested in getting to know our catalog, you can email me my email and I can send you including a catalog in English to facilitate your review of our books.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see what else we've got here. We've got several other comments. Thank you for sharing your experience. Always learning. God bless. And another comment here. Many Christian publishers want authors to have a significant social media presence as a kind of test of their popularity or market impact. What do you think of that trend in publishing?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not the rightest person to say to speak about social media and everything else. Maybe it's inevitable. It's inevitable today to be engaged in social media, and it's hard for an author to get his work known without recurring to social media. Um, but I would not. I don't think that you should focus your efforts on social media or even in promoting yourself as an author. I will risk to say that good books will always find good readers, and in any case, it might be easier to have control over the quality of your work, the literally quality of your work, than over the numbers of readers you will have. So I would invest time and energy in finding your own voice, in finding a singular voice, and this will certainly attract the attention of a good publisher, and a good publisher can help you with the book's distribution and the divulgation and the promotional pieces and everything else, which in turn will result in a growing number of readers.
That's great. Does Mundo Cristal have some titles that are available for translation in other places? Somebody's asking
Yeah,
about translating something to be used in Nepal.
yeah, we have an initiative called NC Global, or Global as you say in Portuguese. We are translating some of our books to English and to Spanish. We also have some books really translated for those two languages, and we are translating another ones, especially those books of Christian fiction, because it's a huge thing in Brazil right now. And I believe that we can exported those books to other contexts, other countries, because the theme, the message that those books contain are universal messages that can bless people from each part of the world.
Another comment and question here from Micah. He says he's participating from Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Central Africa. He thanks you for sharing. He says, what suggestions do you have for publishers and authors operating in challenging environments like theirs?
Well, that's a very good question, and sometimes I think about we are at Mundo Cristão right now, celebrating our 60 years, 6 decades acting in Brazil. And when Peter Cunliffe, our missionary founder, came to Brazil 60 years ago, Brazil was not a good scenario for an evangelical publisher. And he came and he came with the idea that every each book can be a missionary, can
Mhm.
transform one life by one life at a time. And I risk to say that if you are engaged uh, in transforming lives, you will find some partners even in such an adverse scenario, and I know that there are a lot of difficult scenarios around the world, God will make you find some partners who will be and you will find this mutual encouragement to keep going on, to keep fighting this battle of the faith. And the time will prove you are right. Brazil was a country with 5% of evangelicals. Now we are a country with one third of the total population of evangelicals. But this process costs for us 60 years. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy, but you will find a lot of partners in your country, in your context, and if you find yourself immersed in a scenario with other people engaged in the same motivation, I guess you have some victories along the way.
That's great. Thank you very much. We don't have any other questions in the chat panel, but I also just wanted to mention when you were talking about Wu Wei, that is a really interesting concept, and it reminds me of Francis Schaeffer talking about active passivity. So there's a Christian who kind of used that same thing. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a good concept for us to all be thinking about. Thanks for sharing that. Is there anything else, Daniel, that you'd like to share with us before we start our closing slides?
I just want to thank you, Heather, and thank you all the guys, all our brothers and sisters who have participated in this webinar. And I'm always ready to contribute to this precious ministry of MAI.
Yeah,
That's
thank you
it.
very much. Thank you very much for what you shared with us today. Mia, could you start our closing slides? Great. This webinar has been recorded. All registered participants will receive a link to the recording today, and it will soon be posted on the MAI YouTube channel. If you want to find that YouTube channel, just look for the handle MAI Lit World, and you'll find where all those videos are. You can also find some of them on our website too. We want to know how we can serve you better through our webinars. There's a QR code on your screen and a link in the chat panel where you can go to fill out a very short survey. It will only take you a minute or two. We'd love to have your feedback. Make sure you look out for our next webinar in English, scheduled for August 12th at 9 a.m. in New York, or 1 p.m. UTC time. It's entitled The Threaded Rope about marketing the ideas of books on digital platforms in order to expand the reach of their messages. It's being presented by Casey Hemlick, the co-founder of Newbridge Studios and an MAI International board member. MAI regularly offers training in writing, editing, and publishing, both online and in person. We encourage you to go to maiglobal.org to find out more and to discover more resources and information. And until next time, thank you to everyone who joined and participated with us. And as soon as this slide goes off, we're going to have that QR code again for our survey. It'll be going back up, and we'd love to have you fill that out beforehand. And until then, keep writing, everyone. I'm Heather Pubels, along with Mia Toganon, our technical assistant.